Welcome to this series of trainer enablement videos for Prince2 7. My name is John Edmonds, and in this session we're going to be looking at the Prince2 practices, one of the 5 integrated elements of this new edition. First of all, the new name. What was previously themes are now called practices. And our research showed that this was a far more acceptable term than themes to describe these 7 areas of project management. The practices are introduced in chapter 4. It's an introductory chapter to the practices, and each practice is listed there and then briefly described in overall terms. There is then some guidance about how we might apply the practice and setting out the 2 major management products that apply throughout all of the practices. We introduce them here in chapter 4. That's the project initiation documentation and the new project log, the repository for all of the risks, the issues, the lessons, and so on, all gathered in this thing called the project log with its individual components. The format of the practice chapters is a consistent one throughout each of the 7. What you will find is, first of all, a purpose statement for each of the practices. That's followed by a particularly significant part of the chapter, the guidance for effective use of this practice. And here you'll find all sorts of information about risk or about plans or about quality and so on. This will be followed by 2 types of techniques. For each one of the 7 practices, we will have a specific Prince2 technique set out. Now that's the key part of the techniques section. It is then followed by some supporting techniques, and these will typically just be described at a fairly high level, and obviously not every technique that could be used, but just a few to give a flavour. Then we have the section called Applying the Practice. Now, Applying the Practice looks at 5 things that were introduced back in chapter 1. There's the organisational context, the commercial context. There'll be some commentary about different delivery methods and how they impact this particular practice. There'll be the new area of sustainability and how that is going to be applied and tackled within that particular practice. And then finally, there will be some comments about scale, about size and type and so on. So those will be there within the Applying the Practice section. Just looking at 1 or 2 of the diagrams and tables that you'll see in this section. This one looks at different types of delivery method. That's followed by the management products that will be relevant to this particular practice. There's a table towards the end of each practice chapter that looks at the focus of the key roles within that practice. And then finally, in order to reinforce the cross-referencing across the whole of the method, we have got each practice's relationship with the 7 principles. The 7 principles from chapter 2 are repeated here, and then you'll find out how they are applied and what that might result in. So that table, or a table like this, is there at the end of each of the practice chapters. The practice chapters then start in chapter 5 with the business case and go through to chapter 11, the progress chapter. So let's take a look at each one of those now, just a brief look at some of the things that are new, some of the highlights in there, and 1 or 2 of the diagrams. And we'll start with the business case. Essentially, the key message of the business case chapter is the same as the previous edition. We have an outputs, outcome, benefits diagram, which has changed a little bit. In fact, the new diagram reflects a similar diagram in managing successful programs, MSP. So if you're familiar with that, this diagram will come as no surprise. You will also recognize the business case lifecycle from the previous edition. And that business case lifecycle has then been adapted into the Prince2 technique for business case management. So this is something new in this particular edition. So have a look at that and see how we move through the various outline business case, full business case, how that gets reviewed, how benefits get monitored, and so on. So take a look at that. And the sustainability management approach is featured here in this particular practice. So we'll have the business case as one of the management products, and we'll also have the sustainability management approach as one here too. An example of some of the diagrams, remembering that these diagrams that we're seeing here may not be the finished ones, but they'll be very close to them. There's still some final tweaks as we are recording this, some final tweaks being made to just make the diagrams really express the learning that's required for each one of them. So here's the outputs, outcomes and benefits diagram. As I say, that reflects what you will find in MSP. We've got a diagram that looks at the relationship between the project mandate, the project brief, and then leading into the business case. So the evolution of the business case from the business case perspective. And then this life cycle, the business case life cycle throughout the project life cycle. So this is very familiar, and it's on this diagram that the technique is based. And there's those words there that you can see of develop, check, maintain, and confirm. And you'll see how those are then expressed in the business case technique. Moving on then to our next practice, the organizing practice. So here you will see a slight change to the title of the practice from organization, as it was previously, into organizing. Now, this change reflects the growing use of this word, and what's interesting about that, it emphasizes that the project organization is not static. It requires ongoing development throughout the project lifecycle. So there's something very active about this, which is very useful, and it's a way of expressing that just in this single word. So the highlights of the organizing chapter, well as the name change, we've got one or two other things that you will see a little bit different, but essentially the key message of the chapter remains. This is where we look at the project team, the project management team, and the key roles, and the key roles will all be very familiar to you. Now, of course, we've got links with the new people chapter, with chapter 3. So there's some cross-referencing between those two. The project management team structure is essentially the same, with those levels of management, the project board, the project manager, the team manager, the roles on the project board, we will see as the same. We have sort of parked the idea of having the change authority as a core member of the project management team, but the concept is still there and still referenced. It's just that in the diagram you won't see it brought out as a separate role. The Prince2 technique here is the technique for organizational design and development. How we first of all put together our project management team, how we shape that, and then how we develop it and make it work into an organization structure that is going to deliver the project. In the previous edition as well, there was reference to stakeholders, and as we will have seen when we looked at chapter 3, that's now found its way there, and stakeholders is expressed and looked at in a deeper way than was previously the case. Some diagrams. Here we have the 4 layers, as I mentioned a few moments ago. So essentially no change here to the 3 layers that sit within the project management team: the directing, the managing, and the delivering. So we've got those same messages brought out there. Very similar diagram here to previously, with the 3 roles on the project board, project assurance and project support as the 2 other aspects there. So a very similar one. I think you have the this being able to express this in the same way as previously. And here's the Prince 2 technique for organizing. So this is about firstly understanding the organization that we're part of, then designing an ecosystem that's going to be suitable for the project team, developing that project team, that ecosystem, ongoing managing of changes to it throughout the life of the project, and then finally that transitioning back into the organization as the project comes to an end. How do we manage that? What are some of the challenges as we go through these various stages of organizing the project? These are all brought out within this particular technique. That's chapter 6. Chapter 7, we move on to plans. Now, the plans and quality chapters have swapped position. So we look at the plans chapter before we look at quality. So the sequencing has been changed there. It again was felt from feedback and research that there was a more logical way into it by looking at plans first and then understanding quality. Slight change in the key message. Each one of the practice chapters will start with this key message. So just essentially it's still about plans, but just look at some of the slight difference in wording. So you're aware of that and you're comfortable being able to express that. Levels of plan are still there. Classic levels, project plans, stage plans, team plans, exception plans as well. The concept of stages is still here. The diagrams are treated a little bit differently, but fundamentally we have the same approach to stages. And then as part of the Prince 2 technique for planning, we have product-based planning as a core concept within that. The 4 steps of product-based planning are still the same 4 steps. The overall technique, the steps that we go through in terms of building a plan, there are some changes to that. So have a look at those and see how that story develops as you're going through there. We've got some examples of a breakdown structure, of a flow diagram, and they are used to illustrate one of the scenarios. So here's an example of the stages and work packages diagram. Here's the Prince 2 planning technique. We go straight into, right at the start, defining and analysing products. And that's, as I say, broken down into the 4 steps that we have seen before. So you can see the steps going through there: work packages, estimates, schedule, budget, and documenting the plan with risks, as before, sitting alongside there as a continuing step in that technique. And an example plans diagram for the Lewis shopping project. This is the product breakdown structure with some external products, slightly different color and a different shape, to really bring that point out as well. So the next chapter is quality, following the plans with that strong relationship as before. The key message, slightly different key message there, slightly different emphasis. Let you have a look at that and be aware of what that is saying. The chapter still has quite a few definitions, and there's a couple of new ones that have been brought in. Instead of customer quality expectations, we talk about users quality expectations to reinforce the links with the business, user and supplier 3 stakeholder group categories. We also talk about quality specifications instead of quality criteria. Whereas before we had 2 types of criteria, acceptance and quality, we now have the one, and we use this one, quality specifications, to focus in on the quality requirements for an individual product. The Prince2 technique for quality management is actually using this diagram. Now, this diagram is a development of one that was in the previous edition, and I feel there's a little bit more clarity now. It's always been a slightly challenging diagram to put over, and I think it's one of those that needs a story building around it, doesn't it, to explain the way through. So, of course, it has that link to the definitions of a number of those terms. It starts in the top left, where we find out what the users require, and we document that in the product description, and then we go through that journey of the response of the project and building a quality management approach, building product descriptions, using the quality register, and then all the quality control activities involved there. So have a look at this diagram. It's supported by the text that describes the technique as well. The next chapter for the practice section is the chapter about risk. Slight change to the key message. What we've been doing with the risk chapter is making it consistent with MOR4. So that the 4th edition of Management of Risk, which came out a couple of years ago. But we haven't done is simply duplicate the content in MOR4. What we've got here in risk is a more project-focused look at managing risk. And so we've taken all the ideas, all the concepts from MOR and from previous editions of Prince2 as well, and then come up with this one. So lots of similarities, consistent, but not duplicating. And a good example of that, as we'll see, are the steps that we go through. The identify, assess, plan, implement cycle, which is part of the Prince2 technique. So we've kept those as 4 steps, but it is very easy then to relate those to the 8 steps in MOR. We've introduced some new content around risk culture. This particular version, as well as threats, which are in the red circles in this diagram, we've introduced some opportunities. So we can reinforce that conversation about risks equal threats and opportunities. It isn't just the negative, it's the positive opportunities as well. So this will be just another little lesson there for participants. Another name change now with our next chapter, Issues. The chapter previously, of course, was called Change, but it's always been about issues. It's not just about change and change control. Issues were always described as it could be a problem or concern, it could be an off specification, as well as something possibly being a request for change. So we've taken the opportunity now to call this chapter Issues. And that was reinforced by, of course, in the people chapter, the introduction of change management. And people don't always use those terms in the appropriate way. So this chapter, now called Issues, does contain changes, and we'll need to just reinforce with our delegates that this is something different to change management in the people chapter. Slight change to the key message. Again, have a look at the key messages in each of the practice chapters. And we've extended the types of issue. Again, there's the classic ones from before are there, and then there's a couple of new ones added. So have a look at those, familiarize yourself with those, and get some examples of them ready. And then we've got the Prince2 technique for issue management. This is a similar diagram to the one you will be familiar with from before, but with just some slight changes. Some of the words have slightly changed. The essence is very much the same, going through these 5 steps of capture, assess, recommend, decide, and implement. The issue register, the project log at the bottom there, the authority level at the top, and each one of these steps, the 5 steps, is explained within the technique. And so on to our final chapter. Chapter 11 in the practices is the progress chapter. Another slight change in the wording of the key message. And here we talk about the plan, do, check, act cycle, because there'll be a number of different ways that people will be making progress through their project and monitoring that progress and reporting on the progress. And so we give this overarching cycle saying, okay, whatever you do, think of it in these terms. Once again, here we look at management levels within the project. We look at tolerances and how they apply, and the sort of controls. And what we've done here is to extend one of the diagrams that was there before to bring a little bit more information in about those management levels, ensuring that people understand which levels set which types of tolerance, and how we go about responding when there's an exception or there's an issue. We'll have a look at one of that diagram in a moment. The Prince2 technique here is the technique for exception management. And so there's a diagram, again, we'll see in just a moment, which expresses the steps within that technique and what happens in terms of the exception report and the exception plan and who takes part in that. So here are a couple of diagrams. Here's the various layers: business at the top, the project board, the project manager, the team manager, the setting of tolerances down the left-hand side, and over on the left-hand side, the place where that tolerance will be documented. And then on the right-hand side, how issues and progress and exceptions are dealt with, and the management products in which they will be recorded, and some comments about the frequency and the format, who should be agreeing that and approving that. This one's a brand new diagram. This one is the technique for exception management, and you can see some numbers on here: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Each one of those is described in the text that follows this diagram, and it takes people through the various steps from the initial raising of an issue, in this case, somebody in the team, a team manager, raising an issue to the project manager. And so you've got the process names in here, you've got the management products, and then you've got a description of what is happening. So this hopefully will lead to a firmer and a stronger understanding of the whole principle of management by exception. So those are our 7 practices. Some very familiar content, there's some new content, there's some adjusted content. I hope that makes sense, that the way that they fit together, their links with the principles, and as you'll see in the 4th of these videos, there's also links forward into the process chapters as well from the practice chapters. So just concluding with a comment or two about the foundation syllabus. First of all, for each of the practices at foundation level, it'll be about explaining the purpose of the practice, describing the key relationships with the principles, so that makes those tables quite important, explaining the purpose of the key management products and the key management products that first appear or are most associated with a particular practice, defining key concepts, and there's a whole number of definitions and key concepts throughout the chapters, and describing the guidance for effective management and the Prince2 technique. So that's the foundation syllabus, or the headlines from that. And the headlines from the practitioner syllabus: firstly, applying the practice, showing an understanding of the key management products, the key roles, and the effective management and techniques. So taking the things we saw at foundation level now to an application level. And secondly, analysis. Analyze whether an approach to applying that practice is effective and fit for purpose. And in doing so, taking into consideration the Prince2 principles, the effective management and techniques, and any requirement for tailoring. So thank you for listening. That's the third of these videos looking at the Prince2 practices. Remember, there's another one that looks at the Prince2 processes. There's the first one that looked at the overall shape and design of the new 7th edition. And the second one looked at the principles and the people chapter. Thank you for watching.